welcome to Sowtastic podcast. My name is Roshan Hindia. Today we have with us a very young entrepreneur. His name is Abhi Chaganti, and he is out of Oswego, Illinois. And as an 18-year-old, he actually has had a couple of businesses. And so he actually has a snow shoveling business that he's run for about a year. He also recently started a vintage clothing business with a partner. And, he's currently finishing high school. But as a 17, 18-year-old, he's already worked at a restaurant, at a catering company. So he comes from not just following school and education, but also following job and business. So I have some really interesting questions for him. But before we get started, let's welcome Abhi. Abhi, how are you?
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for being on the podcast. And why don't we talk a little about you, your family life, your personal life a little bit. Why don't we have you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Abhi Chaganti. I come from Oswego, Illinois. And my family, I grew up around here, but I was actually born in Hyderabad. And my mom is from Hyderabad. My dad is from Vizag. We come from good, humble beginnings, I guess you could say. My dad, he tells me stories about how he came here with little money, no job. And he just always tells me how it's important to work for what you want always. I know it sounds like cliche, but it's important. So yeah, that's always stuff that I've had. And my mom, she actually owns her own little business too.
Oh, what does she own?
So she actually runs a predictive analytics company called Vector. And so basically they help other companies understand their customers by looking at, through AI and machine learning, you can understand the customer, how much they're coming back, what they do, and like that sort of thing. I don't really know too much about it, but I know.
You know a lot, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. It sounds like you come from a little bit of a business family.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Right. So can you help me understand what made you pursue business in the first place? Was it passion, money, curiosity? I mean, let's be realistic. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of 17 and 18-year-olds think of starting a business.
Right.
If they do, they're passionate about something. They don't actually have the discipline to follow through.
Right.
Can you help me understand what made you get started in business?
Right. I think if you look at my record, as far as the snow biz goes, I think that kind of started as a way to service my community. I looked around me and I've always looked at business as supplying a need, as we look around and how can I make money off of what's happening around me? Like there's snow on the ground, who's going to shovel it? It's sort of a mindset. But I think after that venture last year, as I just got into other clubs, so I'm actually in this Business Professionals of America club. And last year, one of the things...
through your school?
Yes, through my school. So one of the things I was able to do last year was go on different trips and show this presentation that I came up with. And that was a pretty insightful experience because that just gave me different opportunities to look at why other people start their businesses. There's a lot of different people there from a lot of different backgrounds of business. So kind of moving forward from into my next year and my senior year, I kind of looked at business in a whole different light, like not as much as a money maker, supplying a need, but as a way to pursue a passion in the right way.
Now, were your parents supportive from the get-go? Did you have to make a case of how you would take it seriously?
Yeah, so I think the timeline kind of goes with me quitting basketball. Basketball was actually a huge part of my life since I was 6 years old till I was maybe 15, 16. I've devoted like all my time to playing basketball, similarly to how I devote my time into, say, my business related activities now. Wow. I was in the gym shooting basketball. So it probably took a lot of trust for them to think we're moving away from all this stuff that we put into this basketball idea and now going into this aspects, how passionate are you about this? And I gave a lot of conviction towards business. I loved everything that I was doing. As far as my coursework goes, I was going into a lot of business classes too. So I think they saw that early and they were always super supportive of everything that I did.
So help me understand that a little bit. A lot of parents in your parents' position would sometimes hesitate for their kids to start a business because they don't want business to interfere with school and grades.
Yeah, I think it's a false sense of security. So, I mean, parents, I see it all around me. They'll think that they're protecting their kids by not showing them the ideas of business. But as we get older, we're always involved in enterprise one way or another, whether we're joining the workforce or we're developing our own proprietorship. So I think it's important that early on we learn the concepts of accounting your money, budgeting your money, things like that. I think those are crucial to, and taking it to a high school level, I think it's important to start it early. So obviously if you have a passion for something, it's the cool thing about entrepreneurship is it's open to all doors. You can pursue any type of vertical.
So I'm trying to understand your schedule, right? You go to school full-time.
Yeah.
Then you work part-time at a catering company.
Yeah.
How did you manage to start a business balancing both of those things? So over and above not interfering with school, not interfering with your job that was giving you immediate income.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one thing that I learned through all this past year from my junior year is multitasking is definitely overrated. So you don't want to be pursuing everything that's on your mind all at once because the value of the task actually is not as much as if you had put all your effort into one. So my schoolwork has always been first and it's always been my priority as far as my schedule goes. The business aspects come with all my free time, but getting that schoolwork done, and then I think it was important for me to put time aside when the time was right for my businesses. So say when PitStop Vintage, that's what the online clothing store is called, but that was always like a weekend job. I work Friday, Saturday, Sunday sort of thing. I think it's important to whatever we pursue to make sure that we're not getting bogged down by other unrelated things, because we may seem productive if we have a lot of things on our plate, but in fact, we're not actually getting anything done. Me and my dad like to call it cheap productivity.
Oh, nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Actually, because you're right. You can be busy without being productive. Okay, so that brings me to a question of when you started PitStop Clothing.
Yeah, PitStop Vintage.
And the snow shoveling.
Yes, SnowCo.
What were some of the hesitations or concerns of being a business owner?
So I think first and foremost, one of the things that a lot of business owners will fall victim to is marketing is everything when it comes to your product, like your first run of your product, like when you're telling everyone coming soon and you have the website all ready to go and it has like the label saying we're going to be here soon. Everyone's excited, but I think a lot of people fall victim to even executing like their idea. So I think it's important first and foremost to dive headfirst into whatever you're trying to get into. And I know it sounds cliche, but fail at it and try to learn from in that way.
That's interesting you said, because I've seen there's two buckets of entrepreneurs, especially when they're starting up. There's ones that say, I have to plan everything before I execute. Right. And then there's ones that are like, hey, let's just start someplace. We'll figure it out as we go along. Right. And it sounds like you're a proponent of the second. Like, that's okay. Fail. It's okay.
Yeah.
You'll figure it out. But that way, at least you are learning as you're growing.
Yeah.
Right. So help me understand, what were some struggles or challenges that you had to overcome as it comes to as it pertains to getting maybe customers, or you mentioned marketing, as it pertains to just maybe time management.
Yeah.
Can you help me understand some of that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, some of the struggles I've had to face, I think it's important to talk about personal struggles an entrepreneur could face is just a fear of not meeting your expectation or what people expect of you. We, as young entrepreneurs, it could be mindset that you could fall into that, oh, I'm not doing enough, or the people are looking at me like the work output isn't theirs. But I think we fall sight of an understanding that not a lot of people are actually doing what young entrepreneurs are doing. You know, it's a special thing to do what you want to do at a young age. So I think keeping that in mind was important for me from this last year to now, because that's something that I lost sight of a lot is, you know, my clothing business isn't making sales, you know, what are people going to think? But just being very focused on your work will definitely fight off any struggle that just head down.
You experienced what a lot of new business owners experience is when they start up, there's going to be peaks and valleys where there's moments of lulls where you're like, hey, are people interested in my service or product? And it's during those times that a lot of not mature business owners give up.
Yeah.
Right? They say, oh, you know what? It's not working. Forget it. Nobody's interested. When I've seen mature-minded business owners will try to figure out, hey, what else can I do? Because the constantly evolving nature of business is such where you tweak. That in and of itself is the fun part of business.
Right. So I totally see that too, because I think starting a business is a very humbling experience in the sense that when you start a business, you think you're like the guy with the dime product and everyone wants your product. You don't need to do any sort of marketing to get your product in anyone's hands. So I think after your first run, or say your first 5 sales or whatever, after you feel like the guy, then you realize that you actually have to do that work to get your product to be sold. I think that's the humbling experience that a lot of entrepreneurs face. And yeah, like you said, they fall short on. But like my dad has always told me, in marketing, as an entrepreneur especially, it's important to understand that when you send those 1,000 emails to whoever, that only 5 people maybe will click on it, or it's like a very small funnel. And that's something that as a marketer / entrepreneur that you just have to fall in love with. Like your field goal percentage isn't going to be like Stephen Curry, you know what I mean?
Right.
So it's going to be very small, and you have to understand that you're not going to be the guy with the gem product that everyone wants. You have to do some work to get to.
So who do you lean on when you're going through struggles? Or it's not just a person, but how do you get yourself out of the funk?
Yeah, both my parents. Like when something's going on in my head, or I'm just like getting in those phases that I mentioned before about losing sight of these values as an entrepreneur, I go to my mom, I go to my dad, and they're always there for support. And they're always there to just tell me the right things, be supportive, remind me actually, because frankly, sometimes we need that validation that, you're on the right path, you're not, falling short of anything. One thing that I fell victim to, I guess, I don't like to use the word victim, but through this past year was, how do I go from, say, this vertical I have here, this vertical, am I specialized in anything? Like, do I have anything that I could be like, yes, like this is Abhi, like this is what he is. Is he an entrepreneur? I mean, he has all this going on right here, but is he really good at anything in particular? So a worry for the future is something that as a young business owner, it's easy to get hit with that type of fear too. But my parents have always been there to kind of remind me and keep me on the right path.
Okay. So when you started, the number one rule of business is make sure that there's customers or people that want your service. How did you go about getting your first set of customers towards the vintage clothing and towards the snow cleaning?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because both of those actually I think had a way different approach. So as far as the snow shoveling goes, it actually started sophomore year, but not with any infrastructure. It started with me going door to door and texting people on Nextdoor app saying, hey, do you need any? I'm going door to door, me personally, with my shovel, with my friend, and we're going to do it for you. So it started very small, but then the next year is when we got the name SnowCo with all the people. Okay. So that's where it went from being the door-to-door man to social media, Facebook, Nextdoor more actually primarily, and trying to get all these people in through that sort of way. Because my biggest value proposition to my friends my last year was, hey, you need to do the shoveling for me, but I'm going to get you all your customers. And the way I did that was just through mass messaging on Nextdoor and actually text. So a lot of what helped me last year was neighbors in even this area would text their neighbors and they would let them know about a snow shoveling business by students. So as far as even transitioning into this year with my marketing, I realized that people love supporting small business, or there is a critical mass of people in the area that do want to support small business. They also love to support small business that's ran by young people. So I think that was the biggest thing for marketing this year in advertising. So on Next, I would say a lot of book high school students, book students. These keywords are important when you're advertising because these are what get people going. And kind of transitioning that into starting online clothing store, I feel like I was at a bit of an advantage because I kind of started with a fan base already, you could say, because I'm a high school, so I have my peer group and I have the people that support me. So the main difference between snow shoveling and PitStop Vintage is that this one was helping my peers kind of gain their secondary income in a way, you could say. And then this one was kind of encouraging them to spend it. So it was kind of like, support over here was easier to at least attain first, but kind of getting volunteer help in this case was a whole different type of game. So you can actually see that in a metric sense too, because in my first release for PitStop Vintage Throwback Collection released on September 23rd, and that already had 10 sales, I think, something around that ballpark.
Wow.
So that, I mean, comparatively, it actually did a lot better than you could say for a lot of other clothing stores. Yeah. So I think it's important for me to recognize that had a lot to do with me being in the high school setting, because even before I started PitStop Vintage, I would tell my partner and my dad, like, you know, our biggest advantage here is we should start this if we have the idea, because we have the fan base already. Wow. So we should be capitalizing on what we have here, because as soon as you get in the real world, frankly, no one gives a care about what you have going on. So it's a lot harder to get what you have going out there than it is in this environment where a lot of people are, you know, looking at what you're doing, or say you have a friend that cares about if he's friends with you, then he has a little incentive to support what you're doing, sort of thing. Yeah. So yeah, high school is crazy. So
I like that you saw a need and you decided to do something about it. Things strike while the iron's hot, because this time will pass, right? So what have been some of the successes that were unexpected, some accomplishments that you're really proud of for SnowCo and PitStop Vintage?
Yeah, so before we even get into SnowCo and PitStop Vintage, I think one of the successes that I was really proud of was in my Business Professionals of America Club. I actually nationally qualified for that. I was able to give a speech about marketing to, you know, in Dallas, Texas. So that was like a really cool thing that I got to experience. And then taking that momentum into my other things into the next year. One of the accomplishments we saw last year was just nothing tangible, because it's hard to find tangibility in accomplishments as a small business owner. You know, you could set your own goals, like say, hey, I want to make $100 in sales, $1,000 in sales. Then, hey, that's your accomplishment. But it's hard to get an award for, you know, what you're doing early on. But one of the things that I saw as accomplishment last year was, I think we expanded the market for small snow shoveling business. As long as we're putting the trust in consumers, saying, hey, you don't have to go buy this escaping company that's had their stuff going for 10, 20 years or whatever long. You could actually trust a high schooler to get your job done. You know, he's getting some side money here. And, you know, it's just great for the community. And then in my vintage clothing store, I accomplished not any long-term goals, but goals that I had for myself in fashion and just being able to design. There was a lot of what you'll see in this next year for PitStop Vintage is my own clothing lines coming out. So what we do now is curate vintage clothing from a lot of the places we go to, me and my partner, and then bring them on our shelves. So that's kind of our value prop to our customers. Transitioning into the next year, first quarter of next year, I plan on designing a new line of, you know, PitStop branded hoodies, and my artist, Abhi Chaganti, I guess you could say, was one of the things I got to get into. So that was kind of cool.
I'm glad you talked about what you want to see with your businesses next year.
I think it's especially important in business, like you said, what we talked about earlier, when you hit a stump and you fall out of the race. I think as we head into this new year with a lot of newfound motivation out the bag, I think it's very important in business, like to set those goals, those quarterly goals, those yearly goals, because sometimes it's hard to achieve that 1%, get 1% better type of mindset when you have a lot of things going on, say business is your side. That's no excuse to not only move forward with your business, make improvements, but also if you don't have any business and you have some interest in it, it's no excuse to not start one. Because setting these goals as far as personal goes, it's important knowing about finance and your budgeting and all these different types of values. It's important to get into business if you're interested in it as we head into this new year.
So you mentioned a couple of key things towards business and financial literacy.
Yeah.
So can you help me understand, how did you become financially literate as a business owner? Because businesses have things like, you know, profits and loss. So they have, you know, accounting, which I'm sure you do. There's investing into the right vendors, if you will, investing into the right marketing.
Right.
How did you learn those principles?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of trial and error when it comes to what you find in the back end of running a business, as far as budgeting your money, where money goes, you know, advertising. Also looking at, like you said, profit margins and things like, so in my PitStop Vintage, for example, one thing that I was hit with is shipping costs. So the price to ship out those items, that kind of hits your margins at the all-time high, or not an all-time high, but it kind of slaps you right right when you don't expect it because it's at the end of the whole thing, right? I think it's important early on to not confuse your revenue with your profits, cut out those expenses. One thing that I'm lucky for is my parents, they give me a lot of funding to start my ventures. And so I'm able to learn a lot about how to manage on a budget, don't spend too much sort of thing.
Now looking back on it, why do you think financial literacy is a critical skill that people should learn at earlier ages?
The most clear-cut answer to give is that it's important because they're going to throw you in and expect you to know everything. When I say they, the world will throw you into the workforce and they'll expect you to know everything of managing your money, taxes and all this sort of thing. And as a high schooler, I can say with certainty that they don't emphasize too much on these sort of things. So I think it's important for sure to have an understanding, because not even if you're going to go into your own business, or maybe you don't even want to join the workforce, say you want to join a gig and be an Uber worker, it's important to have an understanding of personal finance, budgeting your money, having an understanding of saving, investments is very important as well. I see a lot of people in my age group, sometimes they'll talk about investing, they'll confuse going out all with that one stock and like putting all their money into something, and then they confuse that with saving their money, and they don't like the idea of having a huge savings. Understanding the value of all these things, like yes, you need to have a huge savings because that's like the profit of your person. That's like if you look at yourself as a business,
wow.
That's your profits. So like you want to keep those, and just having all these lessons early on is important. And for me personally, as I've kind of gotten into all these different things and learned about through my business classes, one thing that I've always learned is how important it is to have a grasp of your money early on.
Another way that I love thinking about is being intentional with your money. What you're spending out, what's coming in, what are you shooting for in terms of goals? How do you want to grow it so it's not accidental?
Yeah, I mean, and let me just be the first one to say that maybe I'm not the best at saving my money either and personal. So that's where we need to get this learning done early, because it's important for people to understand, how much like saving your money sort of goes into being a well-financed person. It gives you freedom. I think the big picture message is you're able to do what you want. My friends, or even me personally, sometimes I'm not able to go buy something that I want to get, or maybe I'm not able to get some gift, because as we get older, a lot of the peers, or me myself, we become more financially independent as well. So it's not a lot of my mom is going to spend this for me or my dad's going to spend this for me. So at an early age, getting an understanding of how to save your money, where money should go. Always, my dad always tells me, save money for a rainy day. These lessons were very key in my upbringing.
Now that you've had about a year and a half to reflect on your business, what would you do differently to ramp up faster, better, quicker, whatever that means to you? What would you do, some things that were different to not waste time?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that I would do if I were to start all over again is definitely get a good understanding. I know I sound like I'm a big future thinker and I have these long-term goals now, but that's through all the lessons that I've learned. And the reason why I say that is because when I started before is that I didn't have a good understanding of setting these goals, these quarterly, yearly goals. And when I would get in and I would dive head first, I would realize it's hard to kind of get yourself up when you don't know what's ahead of you, I guess you could say.
Okay.
So
goal setting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just getting a good understanding of, say in my snow shoveling business, say that my customers aren't for some reason start booking me, or they're not really into this whole snow shoveling business year round. So I had the vision for how I was going to maneuver around that. So the way we did that this year is, in comparison to last year, we didn't do this, is we brought in mail-in flyers, and we made sure that instead of getting, say, who's in Bolingbrook, but rather...
Because they're far away. Geographically, they're far away.
Right. I'm trying to service more this area, this Naperville, Oswego, Plainfield, Aurora area. So that was what mail-in flyers brought to us. So that was the lessons that you kind of learn. And I think if I were to start all over again, I think I would just dive headfirst more. Yes, I'm an entrepreneur, and yes, I work hard at what I do, but sometimes it can be in blurbs. So sometimes you'll have a lot of momentum and you'll have a lot of conviction to do what you're doing, but it's very easy to just get complacent, get lazy, and when things aren't going so good, fall sight of everything that you had going before. So setting these goals before, I think, is important, because not only for when you say are lost in the ocean and you need to see a safe boat, but also when, say, you don't have the motivation to keep going and say those sales aren't going up, you actually have something to look at tangibly, something that you wrote down as a time capsule, so to say, to keep you going.
Okay. So you brought some amazing ideas. So what I have to do is give you a little chance to promote your business and why they should go with you.
Right. So snow shoveling, we're in the winter time, obviously. So in this local region of these suburbs off of Chicago, Aurora, Plainfield, Naperville, Oswego, we're pretty flexible in that sense. But supporting small business is the theme this year, ladies and gentlemen, with me specifically, because as a small business owner, as an owner of 2 small businesses, this is how we promote the flow of goods and services in general. With PitStop Vintage, that's important to support, because vintage clothing, if I were to just give a pitch right here, everyone we know goes to the mall and we buy these shirts like this one. Any shirt that you'll see anyone wearing, you'll see that it has some sort of logo on it, some logo that they like due to some mass marketing that they had put on them. Great example of this is Nike. So a lot of people are under the impression that Nike has the best, greatest athletic wear. And then also moving away from that, they're under the image that Polo Ralph Lauren is like the best sort of brand that you can get, that money can buy at this upper middle class level. So with PitStop Vintage, what the message here is that when you buy that item, the value is already depreciating right after the person scanned the item and you bought it. So the idea with PitStop Vintage is we're bringing you secondhand clothing, pre-loved clothing, vintage clothing, but it's so much more quality. You could look at quality as the time period it comes from, how much do I value the authenticity of the piece, how great the material is. So there's so many different aspects to clothing, but with PitStop Vintage, the idea is that frankly, all these categories are better when you go towards vintage. So I think as we head into this winter with new things, new collections coming to PitStop Vintage, it's important to shop PitStop Vintage.
Awesome. Well, good stuff. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was great being on here.
Yeah, and I appreciate you. I appreciate your mindset. I appreciate the questions that you've answered. So thank you again.
Yeah.